Hey guys, so many of you watching know from previous videos I've done on here that I'm very much into trains, and I like to take pictures of trains and like to go out and watch trains and all that other stuff. But I've never actually talked about what it is or certain things about the hobby that I really enjoy. I did a video a few years ago about what rail fanning is and kind of talked about some of the things that people do in the hobby, but I never really touched on things that I personally like about it. So today I wanted to share with you my top 3 favorite steam locomotives. Now, 2 of these 3 locomotives I have seen and photographed. There's one, and it's the number 1 on the list, I have not seen yet, but we're going to start with number 3. Norfolk Western Class J 611, which currently lives between Spencer, North Carolina and Roanoke, Virginia. This particular locomotive was constructed in 1950 in Roanoke, Virginia, and it was built to be a streamlined locomotive, which basically means it was built in a way to reduce air resistance when moving at high speeds. One note in particular, 611 was in a derailment in January of 1956 when it derailed on a curve because it was going too fast around the curve. It was subsequently repaired and put back into service. Now, this repair actually held up pretty well because a few years later, in 1959, the rest of the J fleet was beginning to age, so Norfolk and Western started to retire and scrap them, but 611 was preserved because of how well the repair job was. It was eventually given to the Roanoke Transportation Museum, where it sat for about 20 years or so. In the early 1980s, they restored 611 to excursion service, and it ran excursions till about 1995, when Norfolk Southern, the new railroad after Norfolk and Western merged with the Southern Railway, said that these excursions were a little too expensive to run, so they sidelined 611 around then. So 611 sat dormant for about another 20 years until 2013, when the Fire Up 611 campaign was begun to bring the locomotive back. In 2015, 611 powered her first excursions since the mid-1990s under her own power through the Virginia and the Carolinas. The popularity of 611 has grown quite a bit since her restoration. I've spent numerous times with her since then, and while no excursions have been announced for 2018 yet, I'm really looking forward to maybe going to see it again this coming year. Alright, moving to number 2 on the list, we have Union Pacific 844, which currently lives in Cheyenne, Wyoming. This was the last steam locomotive delivered to the Union Pacific in 1944. It is also the only steam locomotive to never be retired by a North American Class 1 railroad. This locomotive has been dormant for several years because repairs are needed on steam locomotives, significant repairs at times. And 2016 saw the return of this locomotive after a 3-year hiatus for some major work that was being done on it. There was even initial talk that the engine wasn't even going to come out in 2016, but because Union Pacific is just fantastic at the work they do, they were able to get her out in time to power the popular Cheyenne Frontier Days train. I managed to see her pull the Cheyenne Frontier Days train back in July of 2016 between Denver and Cheyenne, which was a very unique experience, definitely not something I've ever done before. Very fast, very wide open area. I'm used to like the hills and whatnot of the East Coast. Not many hills in this part of Colorado and Wyoming. And finally, my number 1 favorite steam locomotive, the only one on this list I have not seen, Southern Pacific 4449, which currently lives in Portland, Oregon. This locomotive is more popularly known as the Daylight because of the way it was painted in its orange and red livery. This locomotive is the product of the Lima Locomotive Works from Lima, Ohio, not too far from here, and it was churned out in 1941. It served in passenger service on the Southern Pacific Railroad until 1956, and then 2 years later it was donated to the city of Portland, where it was put on static display for about 20 years. Famously, this locomotive was known to lead the American Freedom Train during America's bicentennial celebration back in the late 1970s. It was also repainted into a red, white, and blue livery to lead that train around the entire country, actually. I wish I could have seen it, but again, that's for another time, I guess. But since then, the locomotive has operated several excursions in the Pacific Northwest. I have yet to go and see this locomotive, but it is definitely on the top of my list to go and see. In fact, a poll from Trains magazine back from the early 1980s ranked this locomotive as the most popular locomotive in America. So, my top 3 favorite steam locomotives. I have seen others, and there are others on my list of favorites, but I feel these 3 are kind of more popular than some of the others on my list, and I feel these 3 are the ones that many people in this hobby would know rather well. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little informative video about steam locomotives and how there is still steam in this country, just you gotta really look for it. And it's definitely worth your time if you're into anything historical. So I hope this was informative, I hope you liked it, God bless, and I'll see you next week.